In this video, I'm going to be introducing you to the database controls. The data controls is the most important part of developing your applications, and as we know that there are so many data-bound controls, and data-bound controls means that a data controls that can be binded. Anyway, the grid view, the data list, the details view, form view, list view, repeater, and data pager, they are called data bound controlled because you can bind the database information or database data to them. So you can use any of these data source controls: the SQL data source, access data source, link data source. They are data sources. They are the bridge between your database and your data bound control. So you use the data source to connect a database to a data bound control. So let me repeat that: you use a data source to connect a database to a data bound control. So there are a few types of data bound control I've introduced you to. If you for example, the navigation, I've introduced you to the sitemap path, menu, and the tree view. The menu and the tree view, they both data bound control as well, because you can bind them to this. Remember, we bound them to the XML sitemap, the sitemap. So also we have all these from grid view all the way to data pager. They are also data bound controls, but the simplest data bound controls can be found here, which are the one that with the name list on them. For example, this drop down list, we have 5 of them actually. So the drop down list, the list box, we have the checkbox list. They all can be binded to the database. We have the radio button list, and finally we have one more, which is the bullet list. So all of this can be binded. And how do you know if they can be binded to the database? As you can see, this small arrow, if you click on it, you can choose a data source, and if you click on new data source, you can see that these are all the options that you have to connect this list. They're called the list controls. These are the list data controls. So anyway, let me show you how you can use them. So if we let's connect all of this onto a database. So let's add a new database, SQL database, and just click on add. It's warning us that we should place it in a special folder called app_data. So we're going to say yes, and as you can see, we do not have any table here, so let's add one table really quickly. Add new table, and we're gonna call that names table. So this is where we're gonna store our username. So let's say user table, user ID, and we want this to be integer. Allow nulls? No, we don't want it to allow nulls. Also, we want to make this our identity specification. Yes, we want to make it our identity specification, and we want to make it the primary key. Now, so let's put username, name, and let's choose that to be no nulls, and let's just say first name and last name instead of username. First name and last name. Let's assume that some people have a really long name, so let's put that to be 50 characters as well. So let's save this. We should be good. Save yes. Users. Okay, so now we have a table. So let's add some data into the table really quick. Shows table data. So now first name, say John, best week, and let's say Richard Green. Let's say Thomas, and more. Those are all my workmates. If they see this video, they'll kill me. Yeah, anyway, so now we have 4 names. We can save our database. Now let's bind this data controls to our database. So choose data source, new data source. Remember, we bind it to data source. Let's specify an ID for this data source. So let's specify an ID. Remember, all our controls have an ID that you can use to remember them. So we call this users. That's the ID. Users, let's just leave it at users. Okay, so we want to use this database. Remember, we have one database because we can have so many databases in our application. Let's just add this. Now we can say we have a connection string. This is how our our application is connected to the database with this. We're going to be talking more about this in the future. Next, so we can save this connection string as users connection. I'll show you what all this means very soon. So you can save this inside here. So now we just want to select the first name of our users. No, we don't want to select the rest, just the first names. I'm going to tell you more about this advanced controls later. So he wrote a statement for us: select first name from users. So next we can test the query. Let's test the query to see if it returns the first name. Yes, it does. So finish. So now we've banned this. We have one data source on our application. We can bind every controls to the same data source. So let's choose this data source, which we say called users. So we want the data field and to be the same. So let's bind this one as well to the same data source. You can have as many data sources as you want in your application. This one as well, choose a data source. We're using the same data source. If we want, we can create another data source that return just the last name, and we can bind each one of them to different data source. So as you can see, we've binded everything to the same data source. So now let's run our application. Application is currently offline. To enable remove app to offline. Well, the reason why it's taken offline, I don't know, but let's run it again. Maybe it's just doing its own thing. As we can see now, we have 4 users that are binded to list control. Sorry, drop down list control checkbox list is binded to radio button, and it's also binded to the bulleted list. So now let me show you something really quick. If you go to the data source, the most important thing you have to remember is the data source ID, because our data source control, let's look at our data source control, which is this, the SQL data source that we used. It has an ID of users, so every other data bound item must actually use that data source ID. So the data source ID must point to the data source, which is the SQL data source. So the ID here is user and the data source ID is users. So all of them connect to the same data source, as you can see. So if you have another data source, we can use the name here so that we can connect to different. So also let me show you the web.config file. You can see that we have a connection string that has been saved for us. So because I called it users connection, so that means you can connect to different databases. So as you can see now, we have this one. I've saved it as users connection, and these are the connection string that it uses. So if you go back to the default.aspx as well, you can see that our connection string points to user connection. So it's using this statement there, as you see, the open tag and the close tag to point to the web.config file where to find the connection string. So that means we can connect to another database, and also we can use a connection string from another database. Also we can have multiple connection strings. Also we can have multiple data source in an application. So as you can see now, we've dealt with all the 5 list controls, and we've binded all of them to the same data source. This is the data source. We can have multiple data source. If you don't believe me, just go here and just drag the data and just drag a data source onto your website. Thank you.